Good day to everyone. So, this day we are going to discuss the adjusting entries, okay, or the adjustments. So, before that, just a short recap of what we did last time. So, you're able to journalize and then post those entries in the general ledger and then prepare a trial balance. Okay. Now, after that, um, we're not yet done with the journal entries. Okay, we cannot yet prepare the financial statements because there are transactions that needs to be adjusted. Okay, so what are these entries? So these are accruals, prepayments or deferred. We have the depreciation. Uh, we will also include in this topic the correcting entries and then the estimating the doubtful accounts. Okay, so those are the possible um, events that requires adjusting entries. Okay, so let us start. So our outcomes for today are the following. So first, identifying the relationship between the working paper and the accounting equation. Second is to recall the various adjustments that must be incorporated in the working paper and its manner of computation. And lastly is to prepare the adjusting entries and the correcting entries. So the first in our list, okay, so are the accrued expenses. So these are expenses that are already incurred but not yet paid by the business entity. So examples, water bills, electricity bills, telephone bills, and salaries. Okay. So, di ba we incur this, uh, we incur the expense in the current month. Okay. So, for example, if you receive a water bill, okay, today, that water bill is not related to this month, but it is related to the previous month. So, for example, today you receive a bill from an eco or from the water districts. So, that bill nga inyong bayaran for this month is related to the previous month. So karon November naman ta, so mostly the bills are expenses that are incurred in the October. Okay? But will be paid this month. Okay? So usual examples, mga water bills, electricity bills, even your telephone and internet, okay? And salaries. Okay? And also even rent, okay? Rent expense. So we call them accrued in the sense that they are incurred, okay, but they are yet to be paid. So bayaran pa the following month or the following year. Okay. So accrued expenses are somehow similar to an accounts payable account. Okay. So we have already incurred this, but we are yet to pay these expenses. So for example, you have salaries expense for the month of October amounting to 30,000 pesos and are to be paid the following month, so November. Electricity, water, and telephone bills for October amounted to 15,000 are to be paid the next month. So these are accrued expenses. Okay. So how do we journalize the following those transactions? So for the first transaction, so salaries expense for the month of October, amounting to 30,000 pesos are to be paid the following month, November. Okay? So we have to recognize the expense for that month, 'di ba? Because we must follow income recognition or income and expense recognition principle or the matching principle. So kung kanus-ani mo siya kanusa ka naka-benefit, okay? For example, naka-benefit ka sa trabaho sa imong empleyado during that month, then you have to record also the expense that month. Okay? You although you paid it the next month, but the payment is not related, wala nag-match, okay? Because the benefits are already received the previous month, okay? 'Di ba? For example, electricity bill. You benefited using or consuming the electricity in October. However, you are going to pay that the next month because the bill will be delivered next month na, okay? So, according to the matching principle, kung kanus ka naka-benefit ana, okay, dapat dito ka mag-recognize og expense. Okay? In the same way that kung asa ka nga period naka-income, dapat dito ka mag-recognize og expense. Okay? That is why we need uh, to prepare a journal entry. Okay? So for example, for number 1, that's a debit to salaries expense 30,000 and then we credit to accrued salaries expense. Okay? So don't be misled, although it has an expense in the last name, but in the sense it is not an expense. Okay, accrued expenses are payables or liabilities. Okay, so debit salaries expense 30,000 and then credit accrued salaries expense 30,000. So you may write an explanation salaries expense for October. Okay, so next, electricity, water, and telephone bills for October amounting to 15,000 pesos are to be paid the next month. Okay, so we need to recognize. So electricity, water, and telephone are generally belong to utilities expense. Okay, so debit utilities expense 15,000 and then credit accrued utilities expense 15,000. So as for the explanation, you can write utilities expense for October. Okay. So we have already recognized an expense in the previous month. Okay. So what would be our entry if we have already paid, okay, those expenses, those accrued expenses? Okay. So what would be the entry? Okay. So since the accrued expense is a liability, so the normal balance of a liability is on the credit side. Okay. But since we are now paying those accrued expenses, so it needs to be decreased. Okay. So that is why we debited accrued salaries expense and then we credit cash because, of course, there's a cash outflow if we're going to pay those bills, okay, or pay those accrued expenses. So that's why debit accrued salaries expense, credit cash 30,000. So explanation. So salaries expense for October are paid. Then for the utilities, so you have the accrued, debit accrued utilities expense, 15,000, credit cash, 15,000. So explanation, utilities expense for October are paid. Now you may be wondering why I used cash. Okay. So cash is a general term. So if there's no specific as to giun sa pagbayad, it's either through cash using the bills or check. Okay. So pwede magbayad ka through check. So if specific, so kwarta gyud ang gibayad, that's cash on hand. Or if it's through check, you credit cash in bank. Okay, cash in bank. However, if you cannot specify or you do not know whether it's a cash on hand or cash in bank, you may uh you may use the term cash because it already encompasses all the cash transactions. Okay, second, accrued is called the accrued income. Okay, so again, it doesn't mean it has an income in the last word. It doesn't mean it is an income account, but in the sense, accrued income is like a receivable. Okay, so these are already earned by the company, but yet not yet received. Okay, so these are not yet received. So, so for example, kanang magpatahi. Okay, so 'di ba kung magpatahi ta mangayo man na sila og down. Okay, or perhaps imong bayaran daan. Okay, so those are accrued in no, no, no. You have already done your job, you have already delivered, or you have already do the service, okay, but yet to receive cash. Okay, so for example, you are into online selling, and then you have already delivered the goods, okay, and then you are not yet paid, so we call that accrued income. Okay, so kumbaga, there's a similarity between accrued income and accounts receivable. Okay, so for example, we have a transaction. Imagine that you own dormitories and bachelor's pads, and you rent them out to the tenants. Okay, so tenants are those who are living, okay, or renting the pad or the dormitory. So each month you collect a total of 100,000 pesos from your tenants. So each month, so after each at the end of the month, you are going to collect 100,000. Okay. However, according to your policy, this amount is collected the next month. Okay. So the next month pa nimo siya makollect because you need to finish the whole period, okay, or whole month before you can collect the rent. Okay. So example for the month of October, you have a collectible of 100,000 that you can collect in November. So what will be the journal entry for the month of October and November? So let's have October first. Okay, so as I said, accrued income looks like a an accounts receivable. Okay, so it has a similar features with the accounts receivable. Okay, so it's an asset. Okay, so therefore, we debit accrued rent income 100,000, and then we credit the rent income. So we need to recognize an income for that month because even though you are not yet receiving the cash, but according to the matching principle, 'di ba? Kung kanus ang naka-benefit imong customers or imong clients, didto ka dapat mag-recognize og income. Okay? So since October man to ilang girentahan, okay, they have consumed the whole October to stay in your place. So at that period, you need to recognize an income. Okay? So debit accrued rent income and then credit rent income for 100,000. Okay? So may use the explanation rent income for October. Okay? So what would be the entry if you have already collected the rent? Okay. So of course, if you have collected, you will receive cash. Okay. And then your accrued rent income needs to be decreased um, or to be needs to be zero. Okay. So debit cash 100,000 and then you credit accrued rent income 100,000. So in this case, wala na zero na ang accrued rent income. Ang mabili na lang is cash 100,000 debit, credit rent income 100,000. So for the explanation in November 3, so you can state there collected rent income for October 2020. So again, for the explanation, I'm not very strict on um, how are you going to explain the transaction as long as it's related, so that is fine. So the next adjusting entry, okay, so we have the prepaid expense. Okay. So these are expenses that are already paid but they are not yet incurred. So in the case of the load, 'di ba? Magpalit kag load, you are not every time you buy load, okay? So you are not yet consuming the load, okay? Pamani mo na gamit tanan. So it cannot be recognized as expense, okay? That's why it's called prepaid load. Okay? Kanang mo ato ka sa tindahan. So the only time you can recognize that as an expense is pag nahurot na imong load when it is already fully consumed. Okay. So there are cases that the clients will pay in advance. Okay. So or the customers will pay in advance. So we are yet to deliver our goods. Okay. Or we are yet to deliver the services. So for example, katong previous transaction that was in the point of view of the lessee or the tenants. In this case, put yourselves in the shoes of the still in the shoes of the tenant. So based on the previous transaction, you suppose you are one of the new tenants and the monthly rent is 5,000, but your landlord, so per policy, requests that you pay in advance the 2 months worth of rent. Okay? So wa pa ka nagpuyo pero nagipabayad na ko og 2 months advance. Okay? So katoy mo gibayad sa imong landlord or landlady. So we call that prepaid rent expense. Okay, so prepaid expense. So these are already paid in advance, but you are yet to experience or to stay there for 2 months. So the 2 months of rent is equivalent to 5,000 times 2 months. So you have that's not plus, that's equal sign. So it is 10,000. So let's assume that you start renting in November 1st. So 'di ba November 1, so nagbayad na kadaan og 10,000 for 2 months na siya. So debit ka, prepaid rent expense, and then you credit cash 10,000 pesos. And then come November 30, so you need to recognize an expense because you have already stayed for a month. Okay? So debit ka og rent expense, then you credit prepaid rent expense. So to reduce the prepaid rent expense. So explanation, so expense is recognized at the end of the month. And for the last month, so December 31, so your 2 months advance is already fully recognized. So debit na ka og rent expense, then credit ka prepaid rent expense for 5,000. So with these transactions, so you start at November 1 at prepaid nga 10,000. Pag abot sa December kay sige man na gi-credit og 5,000. So November 30 and then December 31. So zero na dapat ang balance sa imuhang prepaid rent expense. The next one is the unearned income. So these are income that are already received by the company but not yet earned or the advance payment from customers or clients. So these are transactions that the clients already paid us in advance. Okay, we have already received the cash, but we cannot yet recognize this an income because they have not yet benefited. Okay, ano wa pa man sila naka-benefit, wala pa nimo gihatag ang goods nga ilang gipalit. Okay, or wala pa nimo na provide ang service nga ilang kinahanglan or imong dapat i-provide. So based on the matching principle, we cannot yet recognize an income. Okay? We can only recognize income if we have already delivered the goods or provided the services to them. So for example, yeah, based on the previous transaction, suppose instead of being the tenant, okay? So let's put ourselves in the shoes of the landlord, okay? So, humana man ta kay tenant, So imagine if you are the landlord and then you are collecting in advance the 2 months worth of rent from a new tenant. So you're the one collecting the advance payments for 2 months. So diba it's worth 10,000. So what would be the journal entry? So in November 1st, so you receive cash from your tenant worth 10,000. So debit cash 10,000, but you have to credit unearned rent income 10,000. So by the way, unearned rent income is a liability account. And then the prepaid expenses are categorized as asset. Medyo misleading siya, but that's the koan. That's the nature of the prepaid expense and unearned rent income. So collected 10,000 in advance for 2 months rent. So pag abot sa November 30, so you have to recognize an income because 1 month has already passed. So you have you now need to decrease the unearned rent income. So debit kag unearned rent income 5,000 and then you credit rent income 5,000. So that is to recognize rent income for the month of November. And then the last month, okay, so another debit for unearned rent income 5,000 and then you credit rent income again for 5,000. So in the sense after December 31, wala na dapat balance ang imuhang unearned rent income because 2 months have already passed. So you need to you are now good to recognize those as your income. Then the fifth adjusting entry is the depreciation. Okay, so again, the reason why we are adjusting is because of the matching principle. Okay, so for suppose the school building. Okay, so the school building is built. Okay, so of course the building is an important asset in every school, diba? Without the building, it will not increase enrollment. Okay, so it will not facilitate um, good learning. Okay, so we need the building, school building, for the school to operate. However, the cost of the building is very high. Okay, so it will take, I think it's about millions. Okay, however, based on the matching principle, even if it costs millions, you are not going to recognize it right away. Okay, dili na siya right away nga imo i-consider na at na kana nga school, kana nga building is as an expense. So for example, nahuman og tukod ang building and it cost 5 million, dili na siya i-expense as 5 million. Nganong inana man siya. Okay? So, according to the matching principle, we need um, to match the income and expense. Okay? The school building will benefit the school for a number of years, di ba? So as long as the school is being there, it can help the school generate more income. Okay? So it can help generate more income. Okay? So that is why there's a mismatch if ang imong income is throughout the years of the school building, pero ang imong expense dayon nimo right away. Okay? So dili na siya inana. So dapat imo sang i-divide ang expense, ang 5 million throughout the life of the asset. Okay? Throughout the life of the asset. Okay? That is why we have a depreciation. So, ang depreciation is um ang iyang literal meaning is that the value of your asset is decreasing over time. Okay? The value of your asset is decreasing over time. Okay? So that is why if you buy a cell phone kanang iPhone, okay, and then the next year imo na siyang ibaligya, if you buy that at 60,000 or whatever amount, you don't expect nga the next year or succeeding years you can still sell that at 60,000 or more than that. Okay? Because the asset are depreciating. We need to depreciate. Okay? Now, how to allocate the expenses? So we have a formula here. So that's cost minus the salvage value over the estimated life of an asset. So we use the estimated life of an asset because as long as the asset is useful to us, we are still benefited from, or the income will still increase because of that asset. So cost is the acquisition or the purchase price of the asset. So including the warranty cost, the installation cost, okay? So all costs that are necessary para magamit nimo ang equipment or ang asset minus the salvage value. So when you say salvage value, it refers to the value nga pwede nimo siya ibaligya paghuman sa iyang estimated life. Okay? So for example, if it's 10 years, so what would be the value of this asset after 10 years? Or at how much can I sell the asset after 10 years? Okay? So that is the salvage value. And then divided by the estimated life. So it's the number of years or the period that the asset is expected nga maka-benefit sa atoa or sa business. So it can be building, it can be machines, furniture and fixtures. Okay. So as long as categorized as an asset, so non-fixed as or mga non-current assets, so we can depreciate them. So for example, if you are purchasing a car and then you purchase a car amounting to 500,000 on January 1, the salvage value at the end of 5 years is 200,000. So what would be the depreciation expense or what would be the annual depreciation? So depreciation is one of the adjusting entries that are journalized at the end of the year. So so to get the annual depreciation, so you have 500,000 minus the salvage value 200,000 divided by the estimated useful life nga 5 years. So you have an annual depreciation of 60,000. So every year until the fifth year, you are going to depreciate for the the car for 60,000. So our entry on December 31, so debit depreciation expense 60,000 and then credit accumulated depreciation 60,000. So you can write the explanation depreciation expense for the year. So every year you are going to recognize this amount until the fifth year of the life of the asset. So for example, if you started this on 2020, so the next year, 2021, so you're going to journalize this again, 2022, so the third year, 2023, fourth year, 2024, the last year. Okay. So so you're matching the expense, the benefit from that asset, and then the expense. Next is the doubtful account. So this is the portion of the estimated collectible accounts. So 'di ba when we do business, and then kung magpautang ta, so naa gyud ay risk nga ang atong gipautang dili makabayad. Okay? So in accounting if we need to account for that. Okay? So kailangan atong i-estimate kung pila ra gyud atong makolekta ug pila kasagaran ang dili mamayad. Okay? Ang katong dili mamayad, that's what we call, or ang estimate nimo nga dili mamayad, that's what we call doubtful accounts. Okay? Doubtful accounts. So, for example, based on the experience, okay? So, based on your experience, so every year na ay 2% nga dili mo bayad. Okay? 2% of the sales dili na nimo masukot. Okay? So every year are going to allocate or give allowance. Okay. So computing the doubtful accounts, so you have 100,000, so that's the total sales times 2%. So you have 2,000 pesos as your doubtful accounts. So what would be the entry? So debit ka, doubtful accounts, 2,000, and then you credit allowance for doubtful accounts, 2,000. So this allowance for doubtful accounts is ginaminus ni siya sa accounts receivable. Okay? So we have accounts receivable minusan sa allowance for doubtful accounts. Okay? So credit, explanation, estimate doubtful accounts. Okay, now let's go to the correction of errors. Okay, so accountants are also humans, so even though their accounting is their specialty, okay, or specialization, there are still cases that an accountant uh, will not be able to do the right entries or journal entries. Okay, so dili uso sa accounting ang magsigig erase or magsigig cash out every time nga masayop siya because delikado na siya. Okay, so pwede ka makahiyaan ana. Okay, so manang as much as possible dapat hinlo imong financial statements walay errors or walay mga alterations. So for us to escape the crashing or the alteration, so we do the correction of errors or the correcting entries. So for example, you have the transaction. So an accountant has journalized the payment for the rent. Okay, so take note, you paid for the rent. So 'di ba dapat ang imong entry is rent expense, then credit ka og cash. However, ang entry niya is inani. So debit ka advertising expense, credit cash. So the debit is wrong, 'di ba? So how to correct this? So when we say correct this, how to reduce or make the advertising expense zero and then recognize rent expense. So the correct entry is rent expense 20,000 credit cash. So how would you correct this entry? So debit ka rent expense. So to recognize the rent expense and then para mawala or mazero si advertising expense, you credit advertising expense 20,000. So ang mahitabuan ni, ang mabili na lang is ang rent expense o si cash. Si advertising expense zero na kay nag-debit ka sa sugod tapos pag correcting entry gi-credit so zero na gid na siya. So as a summary, so these are the transactions that need adjustments. So you have accrued expense, accrued income. So si accrued expense has a similar feature with an accounts payable. Okay? So these are already incurred but yet to be paid. Accrued income is like an accounts receivable. Okay? So these are uh, income that needs to be recognized, but the payment is uh, yet to be collected the following period. Prepaid expense. So this is an asset. So prepaid expense is expenses that you have already paid, but you are yet to receive the goods or services, or you are yet to consume. Unearned income is advance that the cash advance that you have already collected. Okay, so the business entity already received the cash, but you are yet to deliver the goods and services to your clients or customers. Depreciation, so the matching of the allocating the whole cost, okay, towards the life of the asset. So if it will benefit us for 5 years, then you have to divide the cost for 5 years. So that's your depreciation expense. So if it is for 10 years, then dapat 10 years. Okay. Doubtful accounts. So these are accounts estimated sa katong dili mo bayad. So those who have in the past. So the usual estimate that will not pay the accounts receivable or the notes receivable. And then finally, you have correction of errors. So these are entries needed para um, makorek ang isa ka journal entry. Okay? Okay, so this seven transactions, main accounts are the transactions that need adjustments. Okay, okay, so we're done with the discussion. So I will provide you with an assessment that is related to adjusting entries. So hopefully you can finish this before the before Friday so that we can start um, another lesson. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. And thank you for listening. So be safe always. Okay. Goodbye.